The sound of all of us, one voice. This weekend, we have a long weekend due to the celebration of what we hope will from now on become Indigenous Peoples Day. And going forward, we hope that there will be a growing and larger realization that there has been an Indigenous voice in our continent, in our country, that has been not only ignored, but systemically pushed aside and erased. It is something we have to grapple with as a nation all the time when we want to say we are one people with one voice. A nation built on stolen land through largely the labor of stolen peoples has a lot of reckoning to do with itself. And hopefully this transition from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day will help us become further grounded in understanding ourselves in a little bit more of one people with one voice. Friday was National Coming Out Day. And with the Supreme Court recently hearing a case about whether or not it's actually okay to discriminate in the workplace against someone just because of who they are, that's not one people singing with one voice. That's the court of the land deciding whether or not it's okay once again to divide our voices and kind of force us to sing off key. We here in Unitarian Universalism have as a founding religious concept something that encourages us to focus on that one voice and the sound of all of us singing together. And it is that we base our faith not on what we are asked to believe in common with each other, but the covenant of relationship which we are asked to keep with one another, so that there can be people with varying spiritual perspectives in one community, singing with one voice, creating the sound of all of us. This is our covenant here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Meriden. As members and friends of the congregation, we covenant to cherish the well-being of the congregational community above our personal preferences, joyfully welcome, support, and integrate newcomers into our community, embrace our diversity as a source of communal strength, and acknowledge and care for others across our differences, honor and hold ourselves accountable by respecting commitments to individuals and to the whole, assume the best intentions of others and maintain a sense of humor, strive to create a safe place for expression by accepting responsibility for our own actions, speaking our truth honestly with care and compassion, listening with open hearts and open minds, recognize conflict as an opportunity for growth and creativity, so that truth and sound decisions can emerge from an open exchange. We will approach disagreements by remaining engaged in the process with love, compassion, and respect, by listening deeply to others, addressing differences directly while encouraging all voices to be heard. That is not a statement of what we believe in common about the nature of the universe or God or any sacred scripture. That is our relationship that binds us one to the other. What holds us together is the promises we make to each other about how we will be in community, not what we agree to believe. This is not an easy way to live a religious life. Our community as a whole, our nation, our surrounding community in Meriden, our United States of America, we are having a very difficult time living together in community, respecting each other the way we should, acknowledging that across our differences we belong to each other, and we must find ways to bring love and care and compassion to the forefront of how we relate to one another. It is a very different way to approach religion. 10 years ago, my colleague Tom Belote published an essay about an experience he had at a protest he attended in Kansas City, Missouri. He attended an event where people were protesting a Missouri law that would restrict science-based human sexuality education in public schools. When word got out at the protest that a pastor was on the pro-sex in public school side, people, including the media, approached him and wanted to know what this pastor was doing supporting sex education in public schools. And he had a hard time getting anyone to understand about his religious perspective. He says, I explained that we were a covenantal faith, not a creedal faith. That we share a covenant of how we try to be in relationship together, not a creed of what we all must believe together. And then they asked me questions such as, well, what does your church believe about the Bible? And he said, that's a creedal question. We are a covenantal faith. Does your church believe in God? That's a creedal question. We are a covenantal faith. Do you believe Jesus is your Savior? That's a creedal question. We are a covenantal faith. We share a covenant of how we try to be together, not what we're expected to believe. And he said this went on for a while, and it took them a long time to get the idea. They were being challenged to think in a new way. Reverend Belote says, and I agree, sometimes in our churches we stress the fact that we are not a creedal church more than we stress the fact that we are a covenantal church. We emphasize creeds we are not asked to recite more than the covenants we are asked to share. We overemphasize the fact that we are not necessarily required to believe in something, and we underemphasize the covenantal dimensions of our shared life together, preferring not to articulate the covenants of behavior and relationship we do share. I think we do this because covenants require something of us. Let's face it, there are a lot of Unitarian Universalists who do not like any requirements placed on them. And many people arrive at Unitarian Universalism thinking erroneously that we can believe whatever we want because there isn't a creed and there are no demands made on us in order to be part of the community. Oh no. No. Covenants require more of us than any creed ever could. Creeds are binary. They are either or, yes or no, in or out. Covenants are promises. They go to the heart of belonging and what it means to belong one to another, like wedding vows. In an essay about Christian marriage being a contract or a covenant, Reverend Paul Palmer gives a superb explanation of why a covenant is not a contract, and how covenants, being promises, are more powerful in binding us together and more hurtful when they are broken and ignored. So, taking him just even out of his context in which he was writing, his explanation of covenant versus contract or other legal obligation is fantastic. He says, contracts deal with things. Covenants deal with people. Contracts engage the services of people, but covenants engage persons. Contracts are made for a stipulated period of time. Covenants are forever. Contracts can be broken with material loss to the contracting parties. Covenants cannot be broken, but if they are violated, they result in loss and broken hearts and broken trust. Contracts are secular affairs and belong to the marketplace. Covenants are sacred affairs and belong to the hearth, the temple, and the church. Contracts are best understood by lawyers. Covenants are better appreciated by poets and artists and theologians. Contracts are witnessed by the people with the state as guarantor. Covenants are witnessed by God, with God as the guarantor. And being Unitarian Universalist, you can substitute whatever language you need in there for it to work for you. Because we're covenantal, not creedal. Contracts can be made by children who know the value of a penny, but covenants can be made only by adults who are emotionally and spiritually mature. It is covenant, not a lack of creed, that allows us to avoid fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is fundamentally about having no disagreements with one another. And any examination of human relationship at any level will teach us that even in the most intimate of relationships, there will be disagreements. And people will not always think, act, or believe the same thing, no matter how close they are to each other. Fundamentalism is when any deviance from what is prescribed as acceptable is forbidden and shunned and punished. We tend to associate fundamentalism and Unitarian Universalism with the worst of the Christian fundamentalist practitioners in our country. Biblical literalists who hold ideas actually antithetical to the teachings of the Christ they claim to follow. But there are fundamentalists of all stripes. There are Buddhist fundamentalists, and Hindu fundamentalists, and Jewish fundamentalists, and Islamic fundamentalists, and perhaps even the type you'll find most common in Unitarian Universalist congregations, atheist fundamentalists, who are so steeped in a my way or the highway perspective that even saying the word God stops their participation in belonging and covenant dead in its tracks. Unitarian Universalists are not fundamentalists. The most foundational and essential aspect of our entire tradition is the importance of relationship, of belonging to each other across differences of spiritual practice, language, approach, belief, and preference. When fundamentalists don't get their way, they tend to take their ball and go home. Covenant requires us to stay at the table, lean in, engage disagreement and conflict in a mature way. For we have promised, we have vowed to belong to each other. Covenant binds us together in belonging because it is vertical as well as horizontal. It's not only that we commit to belonging to each other, but to something greater than ourselves, to the movement of liberal religion, to the congregation's mission, even for some of us to God. Sociologist and researcher Brene Brown, I do Brene Brown at least one sermon every year, so this is it, says in her book Braving the Wilderness that belonging is more important than fitting in. Belonging requires vulnerability, and the greatest barrier to belonging is fitting in. Fitting in does not require us to be vulnerable with one another. She says, as it turns out, men and women who have the deepest sense of true belonging are people who also have the courage to stand alone when called to do that. They are willing to maintain their integrity and risk disconnection in order to stand up for what they believe in. This is also called self-differentiation. I don't always have to think, act, and believe the same as you in order to maintain relationship with you. Something I think we've forgotten a lot in our country lately. Brown says that when we fit in as opposed to belong, we acclimate to the situation instead of standing for and as our authentic self. Fitting in means going along to get along, sharing perspective, behavior, opinions, but belonging is about relationship and maintaining connection through disagreement, working out how we stay together, even though we have difference. I felt, and this is as a Unitarian Unist minister who grew up Catholic, I felt a greater sense of belonging to the Catholic Church than I have in many Unitarian Universalist congregational settings. Even though I didn't fit in at all, theologically, politically, or culturally, in those Catholic parishes where I was. I fit in with Unitarian Universalists very well. I share the same politics, the same social justice action perspective, the same cultural perspective, and yet I haven't always felt that I've belonged everywhere I've been in the Unitarian Universalist world. Because somehow, even though it's the core of our faith to be in relationship with each other across difference, we fight with each other a lot. And we make those differences more important than the relationship. Here, as a Christian spirituality, I think Jesus is pretty cool. Other places don't do that. And yet somehow I wonder if we've lost the sense of that core practice of everything we're supposed to be. I think we lose sight of belonging because so many of us come to Unitarian Universalism from places where we did not fit in. And as important as belonging is, we all also like to feel that we fit in. And yet fitting in can also be the barrier to that real belonging, that relationship, the intimacy, the vulnerability that really binds us to each other. We are religious from its very root word, meaning to bind back or bind together. And thus religion, what Unitarian Universalism is how we belong to each other, how we are tied to each other. Some people tie themselves to others through belief and creed. We tie ourselves to each other through relationship and promising to be there. And that relationship, that promise to be there, that covenant, allows all of us to do more together than we can on our own. It's very difficult, and I'm sure Alec would tell us this, for one person to provide sanctuary in a meaningful way. It takes a team. It takes a lot of people. It takes coalitions and organizations and all kinds of people working together to make something like that happen. It's the covenant that allows us to sing with the one voice. If you noticed in her song, Ruth Moody in One Voice does a great thing, not only with her lyrics, but with the arrangement. One voice sings alone. It can stand alone and make a choice, but then the two voices come in, and they help each other to make it through. And then the three voices come in harmony, surrendering to the mystery together. And then it's a choir, the sound of all of us. And then it's still the sound of all of us, but the perspective is still one voice. It's a brilliant little arrangement. And ultimately, what that song does is why we covenant as Unitarian Universalists. We seek belonging, not to fit in, but to live in peace with those with whom we don't fit in. Belonging is at the heart of the battle right now for our country and our society. Our entire nation being an ongoing struggle to make we the people actually include everyone in the we. Systemic racism and white supremacy keeps people of color not only from fitting in, but belonging. Patriarchy keeps women from not only fitting in, but belonging. Homophobia keeps the LGBTQ community not only from fitting in, but from belonging. Xenophobia keeps immigrants and people who were not born in the country from feeling like not only they don't fit in, but they don't belong. But they do. All of them. We all belong to each other. The first and most important thing any tyrant has to do to gain and maintain power is to divide the people into us and them. that you don't belong to each other anymore. So in a very real sense, we as a people of covenant need to deeply understand and be aware of that our country right now is pondering whether or not we belong to each other. And if we ever did. We need to use our relationship with each other, our covenant, not only to help our relationships become strong here, but to help the relationships in the world around us become strong, to take that into whatever we do. We all need to be as though we feel wanted, accepted, and loved. We are social creatures, and belonging is an essential human need. Our Unitarian Universalist first principle, the inherent dignity and worth of every person, and the concept of covenant, which we base our faith on, are about belonging to each other. Covenants, the way we agree to be in community together. Statements of how we belong to each other, how we're expected to treat each other. The Unitarian Universalist Association's principles and purposes are the beginning of our UUA bylaws about how congregations belong one to another. We believe each person has inherent dignity and worth, and we have to treat everyone, therefore, as though they belong. And it's a funny thing, when you treat someone as if they belong, that's how they begin to belong. Strange how that works. And this is perhaps the most lofty aspiration of our entire Unitarian Universalist tradition. Everyone belongs. Everyone is holy. No us and them, only we. And our greatest calling is to create that beloved community where indeed we all do belong.